Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
My impression of Art, he's like this, long hair, slick back, wears a leather jacket. He's so cool.
On a new season of Heaven Bent, Beyond Belief, the legacy of Art Lucier and the Harvest.
They turned their backs on her because she refused to follow their teaching. She refused to listen to this doctrine of fear.
So Chris Valentin, this past June, I listened to his podcast, says, hey, I know it's been said here that God did not kill Ananias and Sapphira. He goes, God killed them. I'm not saying that God killed Brittany. I believe he lifted his hand, though. I don't know really what to know there. All I know is what I'm being told, and that day I knew that this was a death out of time. I was speaking to my sons. I said, sons, I don't care where you go, what school, what ministry, don't ever oppose the leader. Don't do it. He's anointed by God, whether or not he's messed up, sinning, whether or not you agree with him, serve him, lift him up. Don't oppose him. Don't do it. Protect yourself. Don't do it. And I'm not saying that about my position here. I'm talking about correctly discerning the body for all of us.
I get it. But I got two messages back, one of them from Patricia Bootsma and one of them from Nolan Clark. And they were identical messages. And the messages were, Art, you have just experienced an Ananias and Sapphira moment. We believe that the Lord has lifted his hand off of your daughter, taken her home before she was able to go too dark and too far and renounce even knowing the Lord.
Brittany died was a Saturday. She told me she had a headache. She said it was bad. She'd taken Tylenol or something, but it wasn't doing anything. I just thought, it's a headache, they come and go. By this point, it was fairly late in the evening, and Brittany started losing motor function. That scared me. That scared me a lot. So I drove Brittany down to the hospital, and by the time we got to the hospital, she just started fading. And I just remember standing off to the side until my legs hurt, and then crouching, leaning against the wall, and I didn't know what was going on. And somebody said, we need to intubate her, and I didn't know what that meant, but I found out real quick. And I just felt empty and cold.
Brittany had suffered from an aneurysm as a result of having lupus, and it didn't take long before word got around that she'd passed away.
And then people started showing up, and I don't know who said what or who told who, but people just kind of started showing up, and there was people from the Harvest there, and there was my family. My mom and dad got there, and my brothers and sisters, and just everybody who cared about Brittany just showed up until the room was full. Like, there's just so many people there. Art was there when I got there. I don't know when Art disappeared. I don't know how long he was there for, but I know that at some point I realized there are all these people here, and Art's not among them. And when my grandma got there, I was sitting beside the bed holding Brittany's hand. And when my grandma got there, I got up to give her a hug, and then the nurse came in, and the nurse was checking her vital signs, and then she said, she's gone. And I realized that just a few seconds before, her hand had gone cold, and I didn't realize, I didn't want to admit to myself what that meant. But I was holding it, and I felt it. Somebody said something to me at some point that Art and Heather felt like they've been left out of the funeral arrangements. And so I wanted to go and talk to them. And I asked Art and Heather to basically set their differences aside for one day, just to give Brittany the send off that she deserved. Art wouldn't. He refused. And he ended up storming out. In Chetwynd for 2 weeks, and while I was up there, I got a text from my sister, and she said something like, "You're not going to believe what Art's saying about it."
Salem's about to talk about an infamous message that Art preached at Kitimat Harvest Church 9 years ago. This is available for anyone to see on YouTube. It's dated November 1st, 2014, and it was shared just shortly after Brittany died.
She skipped the music festival. This spirit took her away what she loved, worship. And at first I thought she was going to be, but then when she was asked, "Are you coming?" No. This thing started to just harden in her and took her away from the presence of God, which she loved. She seemed healthier than ever. Her sickness all of a sudden just didn't seem to be an issue. It seemed to leave. And then there came the day that I had to walk her down the aisle. And I've got something hard to say here, even more about this. And you know what? I don't want any rift with anyone here. I'm just trying to be obedient. This is going to be a lot easier for me to go preach across the nation. I didn't want to preach this here. The day that she got married, and she wasn't sure if it was her mom going to walk her down the aisle or me, or I said, "Hey, what do you want?" She goes, "I want you to walk me down the aisle." Fine. And so I did. And it wasn't the best situation, just say it like that, the wedding and everything, and her friends were left out somewhat, and we didn't know what was going on, and it's our Brittany. We love her, and this was not the vision I had for her, how it was supposed to be. And I said, "Well, I gotta walk her down the aisle today." And the Lord spoke to me. You know what he said? He goes, "I want you to hand her over." I'm like, "God, I don't want to do that." He goes, just hand her over, give her to me. So when I walked her down the aisle, in my heart, I had to give her over. And I said it to Heather before that day when we were driving to Hazeltown. I said, I've been asked of God to hand over. What does that look like? And I did. A fear hit me. I did not want to do that. I know I had to. I was not sure what the outcome would be. I knew that only time would tell. There was a verse in the New Testament that talks exactly about that. And so I went and looked it up. This is what it says, 1 Corinthians 5:5. "Hand this man over to Satan for the destruction of their flesh, so that his spirit may be saved on the day of the Lord." It would be 7 weeks later, after I walked her down the aisle, that she was taken from us. There was many people who knew about some situations, even in the nation, that was praying for her and concerned about her. The day that she died, Nolan texted me, goes, "Dude, I'm sorry, but I got to be obedient to the Lord. And I've got a verse for you that the Lord spoke to me." He goes, "By the way, before I say this, Art, I just have to let you know, I know that she is saved. I know that she's in heaven. I believe it was the mercy of the Lord that she is gone, actually." He goes, "But this is the verse that I got, 1 Corinthians 5:5. And he said, it was that verse, hand that man over, so on the last day that her spirit would be saved. I didn't know it. I was such an emotional thing that day. Fear of the Lord hit me. Nolan loved Brittany. Brittany held Nolan in high regard as well. But that is the verse that he got that day. I'm going to give you an email. This woman her name's Patricia. She's in charge of the Ontario Prophetic Council of all Ontario. She's the senior pastor for Toronto Airport Church. On her way over here on the plane, she caught something about my daughter. She goes, "Art, there's witchcraft against her." There was something else there that I can't say. because I don't want, I want to be honoring. But Art, there's this witchcraft against your daughter, and she's deceived, and I need to talk to her. I'm like, you have no idea. So Patricia Bootsma writes me a message, and I gave it to Brittany, and Brittany just sloughed it off. And so Patricia, the day that she died, sent me an email. She apologized for it after. Not for the contents. It was still truth, but me and Patricia know each other on a prophetic level, and prophets sometimes can say it out of here, not out of here, and they won't even think first. That's the prophetic is from the Spirit, and that's why sometimes you don't even remember what you say. And she just said something to me in an email. She just sent it out. She goes, Art, what can I say on a level that I'm shocked? On another level, I'm astounded at the times we're living in and the seriousness of walking contrary to the will of God. She believed that Brittany stepped out contrary to the will of God. She goes, Art, I'm sorry for your pain. Of course, I'm convinced of God's mercy that she is in heaven. However, we are entering into the Ananias and Sapphira times. Kyle Mumby, another prophet of Canada, had an angel appear to him and say 555, which is the 5th book of the New Testament, which is Acts chapter 5, 5th verse, which talks about Ananias and Sapphira. And in case you don't know that story, let me just quickly sum it up for you guys. The church is moving in power. These two people sell some property, come and lay the money at the apostles' feet, Ananias and Sapphira. But Ananias lied, and that's all he did. He just lied. And the apostles, though, got a word of knowledge. Is this all the money for it that you got from the house? Yep. He goes, why have you agreed to lie to the Holy Spirit? And boom, Ananias dropped dead. Sapphira didn't even know that, and there's no texting in those days. And so Sapphira shows up later, and they confront her. Is this the money? She dropped dead too. Great fear hit the whole church. Now, some people think that doesn't happen anymore. That was New Testament. But a lot of people think that God won't do that. In fact, I was in Bethel 5 years ago, and a teacher by the name of Danny Silk got up and says about this story of Ananias and Sapphira. He goes, well, since all sins are paid for, there's that grace thing, it's impossible that God judged them. So it was simply the apostles' authority that killed them. They were just mad, and they said, hey, you're dead. And boom, they dropped dead. And I was sitting there, I'm like, wow. Chris Valentin, Danny Silk has now left Bethel. Chris Valentin, this past June, I listened to his podcast, says, hey, I know it's been said here that God did not kill Ananias and Sapphira. He goes, God killed them. I'm not saying that God killed Brittany. I believe he lifted his hand, though. I don't know really what to know there. All I know is what I'm being told, and that day I knew that this was a death out of time, that God had lifted his hand. You see, some people, and Patricia Bootsman goes on, Art, I'm just so sorry. I feel there's a spirit on Brittany of untimely death, even tied to her mother. With a lack of healing, the spirit was allowed to operate. I love you, Art. Don't quit or lose heart. You have a message to this next generation that's being amplified in this time. Preach it at the funeral and see souls saved. I was like, no, is that a word from the Lord? I'm not preaching this at the funeral. And I was really torn, but I didn't, as you know, and people have thanked me for that. But I've been carrying this for 2 weeks. Now listen, some people think that at the cross, that God went through anger management, right? Now he's better. I'm not angry anymore. I just want to love everyone. No, that actually didn't happen. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever.
He said that he was going to talk about it once, and then he would never talk about it again.
And it was, now remember, 7 weeks earlier, the Lord had says I needed a hand. And I got a hold of my friends, a couple prophets, and I'm going to share their names. I don't think they'll mind. They were close to me at the time. One of them was Patricia Bootsma, a prophet who now lives in the States, who was in Toronto in the revivals. And one of them was my good friend, Nolan Clark. They both knew Brittany. Nolan knew Brittany very well. I told them, I said, listen, she's in a coma. You guys need to pray. 7 hours later, when they found out that she had passed, I told them, I said, well, she's gone. And here's where it gets even crazier, people. Because listen, bad things happen all the time to good people. Good things happen to bad people. Bad things happen to good people. We live in a very fallen world. Not every cold or hiccup is from the devil. And so I get it. But I got 2 messages back. one of them from Patricia Bootsma, and one of them from Nolan Clark. And they were identical messages. And the messages were, Art, you have just experienced an Ananias and Sapphira moment. We believe that the Lord has lifted his hand off of your daughter, taken her home before she was able to go too dark and too far and renounce even knowing the Lord. Now, that doesn't sit well with some of you. That's fine. This was something that happened to me and my family, my daughter. I did get messages back a couple of days, 3 days later saying, oh, we're sorry that we sent you that message, but it was of the Lord. And I said, don't need to apologize, Patricia or Nolan. I know I feel the same. I believe it was an Ananias and Sapphira moment. I believe the Lord did lift his hand off of my daughter for her vows that she had made and for renouncing the gifts of God, the covering of myself as a father. And it's a sign unto the church. That doesn't sit well with some of you, but I'm going to go on. A week later, the Lord told me very clearly, you now have a message for Canada that you will give to Canada. And he goes, I need you to preach it to the church. The first people to hear this will be the church. It said, so I did in obedience. A week later after her passing, I had to tell Kelowna Kitimat Harvest Church why she passed away, and that there's coming great days of grace, great grace, as we see in Acts. Interestingly, a prophet, while in Toronto hanging out with Carol Arnott, gave a word earlier that year that was sent to me saying 555 is the number of great grace. We're coming into days of great grace, but as the days of Ananias and Sapphira, great grace, so will moments of Ananias and Sapphira, people dying as they curse the things of the Lord will be happening. And people who are lying, we all lie. We've all lied. The problem is that Ananias and Sapphira lied at the wrong time when God really draws close. And now remember, the fifth book is Acts, the fifth chapter, the fifth verse is the story of Ananias and Sapphira. So I believe we're coming into days of great grace and great judgment on the Church of God. That's what I believe. That's what I believe I saw happen. Now the Lord said to me, you have a message for Canada.
He said that he was going to talk about it once and then he would never talk about it again. And then he said that God told him, or the people told him, that this was a message for Canada, for the Church of Canada. It's just all about him. He just kept saying about how hard it is for him to talk about this. And what about Brittany, Art? He said that that Brittany had been led astray by a spirit, a false spirit. And it was pretty obvious. He never said my name, but he was talking about me. He made it pretty crystal clear. And he talked about how Brittany had fallen for a false message, and that he said God had to lift his hand from Brittany, remove the divine protection from her, and let her die because of the decision that she made. I don't understand. I don't understand where he read that in the fucking Bible. It's horrible. I mean, it seems to me that Art is really blaming Brittany for what happened to her. I really don't know how else to put it. It makes me angry to hear him talk like this. It makes me angry to think about it. Like, he keeps saying you got to discern the body, you got to follow the will of God. But in his context, the will of God means doing what the leadership of the church tells you to do. Discerning the body means respecting the leadership of the church. And in this case, the leadership of the church is Art himself. And he really just kind of flagrantly comes out and says it right at the end when he's talking about what he told his sons. If you have somebody in leadership over you and they're sinning, you just keep your mouth shut. You put your head down and you don't say anything.
Young people, do you hear my voice? I was speaking to my sons. I said, sons, I don't care where you go, what school, what ministry, don't ever oppose the leader. Don't do it. He's anointed by God, whether or not he's messed up, sinning, whether or not you agree with him, serve him, lift him up. Don't oppose him. Don't do it. Protect yourself. Don't do it. And I'm not saying that about my position here. I'm talking about correctly discerning the body for all of us. I go out and I serve ministries and I see things and people. I will not oppose them. I will not speak negatively about them. They have to be dealt with by the Lord. Unless, of course, I'm the elder over them. That's different. But I told my sons, just go and serve. But don't just turn a blind eye. And if Noah was naked in a tent, the two sons dropped the blanket, covered him. The two good sons. I'm not saying the other son was bad, but he's like, hey, did you know Dad's laying naked? Listen. And he was cursed because he wrongly discerned the family.
Really just kind of flagrantly comes out and says it right at the end when he's talking about what he told his sons. If you have somebody in leadership over you and they're sinning, you just keep your mouth shut. You put your head down and you don't say anything, because you're opening yourself up to the same thing that happened to Brittany if you do. This is the tool that Art has used over the years to keep people in line. And it's also the tool that he's used to attack the people who have left, to ostracize them, to cut them off from their friends. You know, he said a number of times that Brittany shut out her friends, that she turned away. She didn't turn away. She wanted nothing more than for her friends to treat her the same after she made the decision to leave. But that's not what happened. What happened is they shut her out. They turned their backs on her because she refused to follow their teaching. She refused to listen to this doctrine of fear. And the one thing that was left over, the one thing that was real, was the thing that was real for Brittany. It was the people that she loved and the people who loved her. It was the people from the Harvest who had been through so much. I wish that Brittany could be here today to tell her own story. I wish that she could be the one saying this instead of me. I wish that she could be the advocate to stand up for the people who were hurt by the Harvest. I've been called a victim of art, and I don't agree with that. I've never felt like a victim of art. I think in order to be a victim of art, you'd have to be seen by him, and I never felt seen by him. I don't feel like I ever got close enough to him or came under his power and influence enough to become a victim of him. If you want a victim, it's Brittany. It's all the people before her who fell away, who left broken when they should have found healing. Because I know that there's a lot of people with stories that'll never be told. I know that there's a lot of people who are too scared to speak out against art. They know that he's got power. They've seen what he's done to others who have spoken out. And they're scared and they're hurt. And they need to know that they're not alone. They need to know that he's not the great untouchable prophet that he claims to be. I hope that one day I hope that one day they can know that. But I'm not a victim. And if Art wants to come at me for speaking out, if he wants to say nasty shit about me on the internet, I say let him have it.